Imagine a terrified one standing in a cold graveyard right at dawn, realizing that a corpse has just vanished.
Right, a terrifying moment.
Totally. And now kind of hold that image in your head and simultaneously picture a desperate, impoverished widow sneaking onto a moonlit threshing floor centuries earlier just to uncover a sleeping man's feet.
Which is quite a contrast.
It really is. Today, we're looking at how these two completely scandalous, seemingly unrelated moments just entirely rewrite the foundation of human history.
Yeah.
So, welcome to today's deep dive. If you're listening, go ahead and, pull up a chair because we are unpacking this really fascinating study text compiled by author Frank Leo.
Yeah, it's a brilliant compilation.
It is, because his approach just kind of throws traditional categorization out the window, right? He takes Mark chapter 16, the resurrection of Jesus, and puts it side by side with Ruth chapter 3.
Which, most people would never put those two together.
Exactly. So the mission for us today is to figure out how a dusty threshing floor in Bethlehem legally and theologically prefigures an empty tomb in Jerusalem.
Yeah, the audacity of connecting those two texts is honestly what makes Frank Leo's compilations so compelling. You are looking at two entirely different eras, right? Two different genres of literature, and yet they share this profound underlying architecture.
It's wild.
It really is. We're going to explore how the ancient Hebrew legal concept of a kinsman redeemer operates in both of those stories. And we'll also, examine the shockingly distinct early testimony of the women at the tomb.
Right.
And we'll contrast that with the apostolic leadership's perspective and eventually unpack the intense early church debates regarding miraculous signs and apostolic authority.
So a lot to cover. But to understand any of those apostolic claims about the resurrection, you really have to start right there at the empty tomb.
You have to.
And the very first witnesses on the scene, they completely upend the social hierarchy of the ancient world. Like Mark 16 begins with Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Solomon by buying spices just after the Sabbath ends.
Yeah, and the timing of that purchase, it's far more than a scheduling detail.
Really? How so?
So the scholar Derek Prince highlights the heavy symbolism here. In the Jewish tradition, the Sabbath is the culmination of the week, right? It's rooted in the law.
Okay, yeah.
The moment the Sabbath ends and the first day of the week begins, the women step out. Prince argues that this represents the definitive end of Old Covenant legalism and the dawn of the New Covenant era of resurrection hope. So, they are literally, physically, walking into a brand new era of human history.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. But the irony is their mindset wasn't triumphant at all,
Oh, not at all.
They are walking into this new era of resurrection hope, but they're fully expecting to find a dead Lord.
Yeah.
They are showing incredible devotion by going out in the dark to anoint a corpse, which just creates this glaring contrast with the apostolic leadership.
Yeah, a massive contrast.
Because the male disciples, the ones who had been explicitly promised leadership and, were told about the resurrection beforehand, they're hiding.
Right, they're locked away.
Exactly. The women are the ones actively moving forward, even if their theology hasn't, caught up to the reality of the empty tomb yet.
Yeah, and the text grounds that massive theological shift in a very human moment of practical anxiety.
Oh, the rock.
Yeah. As they walk, they begin stressing over this purely logistical problem, asking each other who is going to roll the massive stone away from the entrance of the tomb.
Which is arguably, to me at least, the most relatable part of the entire narrative.
Oh, 100%.
Here they are having a near panic attack over a heavy rock. It's like a modern employee hyperventilating over a minor typo in an email, right?
That's a great analogy.
Right, while completely oblivious to the fact that their company was just bought out for $10 billion and they never have to work again.
Exactly.
They're paralyzed by this physical obstacle when death itself, the ultimate obstacle of the human condition, has just been conquered inside that very tomb.
Yeah, it's profound. And then when they arrive and find the stone already moved, they encounter an angel who delivers the core announcement of the Christian faith. He is risen.
The pivotal moment.
Right. But looking at this through the lens of historical authenticity requires us to, evaluate the messengers, not just the message. The historian N.T. Wright offers a really brilliant sociological insight regarding these women.
Okay, let's hear it.
So, in the first century Greco-Roman and Jewish worlds, the testimony of women was widely considered unreliable. It was generally not accepted in a court of law.
Which means if you are trying to start a movement in the first century and, convince a highly skeptical public that a dead man came back to life.
You want the most legally unassailable witnesses possible.
Right. You'd pick prominent men.
Precisely. Historians apply this metric called the criterion of embarrassment to ancient texts. Wright argues that if the early apostles were fabricating the resurrection narrative just to build their own authority, they would never have intentionally made women their primary foundational witnesses.
Because it would just hurt their case.
Exactly. Doing so actively undermined their credibility in the eyes of their contemporaries. So the fact that the early church preserved this deeply embarrassing detail actually serves as powerful proof of the text's historical authenticity.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, they documented it that way because they were bound by the historical reality of what actually happened, regardless of how it played to a first-century audience.
Wow. And the layers of that authenticity become even more apparent when we examine how the earliest Christians preserved this specific text across different languages, right?
Yes, the linguistic side of this is fascinating.
Because Franklio's study doesn't just rely on the original Greek manuscript. He brings in the Syriac Peshitta.
Right.
And for those listening who might not be familiar with it, the Peshitta is the standard ancient version of the Bible for churches in the Syriac tradition. The way the Peshitta translates the angel's announcement in Mark 16 completely illuminates the historical reception of this event.
It really does, because in the original Greek text, the phrase "he is risen" uses the verb ogerthi.
Okay.
Theologically, this is known as a divine passive. The grammatical structure implies that the action was done to him, meaning God the Father raised Jesus from the dead.
Got it.
But the Syriac Peshitta translates that exact same moment using an active verb, komle, which translates simply to "he rose."
Huh. So a skeptical reader might look at that and say, well, the early church couldn't even agree on whether Jesus raised himself or if God the Father raised him.
Right. A superficial reading might definitely lead to that conclusion. But linguists and theologians see this as a demonstration of Trinitarian synergy rather than a contradiction.
Synergy, okay.
Yeah. The Greek preserves the divine initiative of the Father, while the Syriac preserves the inherent divine power of the Son to take his life back up again. Both grammatical structures were embraced by the early church because they believed both realities were simultaneously true.
It's amazing how the language is doing so much heavy lifting there. And we see another fascinating linguistic choice just a few words later in Mark 16.7.
Yes, the message to the disciples.
Right. The angel instructs the women to go and tell the disciples and Peter. Charles Spurgeon actually wrote extensively on the deep grace embedded in those two little words.
Because of the denial.
Exactly. Peter had just committed treason, essentially, by denying Jesus 3 times to save his own skin. He likely assumed his failure was final. Yet, Jesus specifically singles out the disciple who failed the most spectacularly.
And the Peshitta deepens that moment of restoration even further. Instead of using the Greek Peter, the Syriac text uses his Aramaic name, Cephas, which means rock.
Oh.
Right. That was the foundational identity Jesus spoke over him when they first met.
Right. You are Peter, and on this rock.
Exactly. So in the absolute lowest moment of his life, shrouded in shame and apostolic failure, the message he receives doesn't just invite him back to the group, it reinstates his original calling.
That is just beautiful.
Yeah.
And this initiative to, seek out the broken, bypass the strict social hierarchies, and offer total restoration, that is the perfect bridge to the second text in Frank Leo's study.
The Book of Ruth.
Right. Because this mechanism of redemption wasn't a new concept invented in the New Testament. It was legally and theologically mapped out centuries earlier in Ruth chapter 3.
Yeah, and the context for Ruth is just dire.
Really dire.
She is a Moabite. So, a foreigner and a widow living in absolute poverty with her mother-in-law, Naomi, in Bethlehem. Their family line is basically facing extinction.
So what do they do?
Naomi instructs Ruth to wash, put on her best clothes, and go down to the threshing floor at night. A wealthy relative named Boaz is sleeping there to guard his grain after the harvest. Naomi tells Ruth to uncover his feet and lie down.
Okay, so to modern ears, sneaking into an agricultural facility in the middle of the night to uncover a sleeping man's feet.
Oh, it sounds scandalous at best.
Oh,
Right?
for sure. And highly inappropriate at worst. It reads like an ancient romance novel. But you pointed out earlier that this is actually a rigid legal procedure.
It is. The optics are certainly dangerous, which is why Ruth's action requires immense courage. But uncovering the feet, the Hebrew word is margalit, is a formal, highly symbolic petition.
So it's not romantic.
No, Ruth is not initiating a romance. She is demanding that Boaz fulfill his legal obligation as a gono, a kinsman redeemer.
Oh, okay. So when Boaz wakes up startled in the dark, Ruth says to him, "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer."
Yes, and the Hebrew word she uses for the corner of the garment is kanaf, which translates literally to wing. She is asking him to spread his wing over her, bringing her under his legal and physical protection.
Right.
What connects this ancient legal custom directly to the New Testament is how the Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament, translates that word. They use the Greek word pterygion, meaning little wing.
And that specific Greek word is the linchpin, right? Because it appears again in the messianic prophecy in Malachi 4, which promises that the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings.
Exactly. Frank Leo is showing us how the text is weaving a direct, undeniable thread from Boaz's protective garment on that threshing floor to the ultimate healing and protection offered by the Messiah.
That's incredible.
It is. And Dr. Michael S. Heiser and Derek Prince provide a crucial framework for understanding why Boaz is the perfect prototype for Christ here.
The qualifications, right?
Yes. Under ancient Israelite law, a kinsman redeemer had to meet 3 non-negotiable qualifications. First, he had to be a blood relative. Second, he had to be able, meaning possessing the wealth or societal power, to actually pay the debt or buy back the lost property.
Okay, and the third?
Third, he had to be willing. No one could force a Goela to take on the burden of redemption. It had to be driven by love or deep loyalty.
And when you lay those 3 legal requirements over the life of Jesus, the theology just clicks into place perfectly.
It really does.
To be the ultimate goal for humanity, Jesus first had to become our kin, which is the theology of the incarnation, right? God taking on human flesh and blood.
Exactly.
Second, he had to be able, possessing the divine authority to actually conquer sin and the grave. And finally, he had to be willing, choosing to endure the cross out of love rather than obligation.
Spot on. Boaz and Christ both step into situations of total despair and offer comprehensive redemption. But what Frank Leo's study does next is, well, it forces us to look at how people responded to those offers.
The contrast in reactions.
Right. It draws a stark contrast between ancient covenant loyalty and the skepticism of the early apostolic leadership.
Which is wild to think about.
Yeah.
Because Ruth's response is defined by the Hebrew concept of east.
Yes.
It's this massive theological term, usually translated as covenant loyalty, loving kindness, or steadfast love. And Ruth demonstrates east by taking an active, courageous, and highly risky step of faith in the dark.
She doesn't pursue younger men for her own comfort.
Exactly. She binds herself to the older Boaz to preserve her deceased husband's family line and care for Naomi.
And Boaz explicitly praises her for this, noting that her later said is greater than her first. She understands that true loyalty requires personal sacrifice. Now, if you compare Ruth's active sacrificial faith with the behavior of the 11 remaining disciples in Mark 16.
Oh boy, it's not a flattering comparison.
Not at all. When the resurrected Jesus finally appears to them in verse 14, he doesn't offer a warm greeting.
He issues a severe rebuke.
A very severe one. The Greek text says, he rebuked them for their unbelief and their hard-heartedness, using the word sclerocardia.
Sclerocardia, a hard heart. I mean, that is a devastating critique for the men handpicked to lead the church.
It is. And the theologian Vadi Bokum offers a really fascinating critique of how modern audiences read that exact moment.
Oh, what does he say?
Well, in our contemporary culture, we tend to view skepticism and unbelief as a form of intellectual humility, right?
Yeah, like I need proof.
Exactly. We frame it as being rational, waiting for sufficient empirical evidence before committing. But Jesus does not treat the disciples' unbelief as a neutral intellectual holding pattern. He diagnoses it as a profound moral failure.
Wow.
They had the testimony of the women, they had his own prior prophecies about rising on the third day, and they still chose the safety of their skepticism over the risk of belief.
Dr. Craig Keener actually echoes this. He points out that biblical faith is never depicted as passive waiting.
Never.
Right. Whether it's Ruth walking onto a dark threshing floor surrounded by sleeping men, or the women walking to a sealed tomb surrounded by Roman guards, true faith involves stepping out in action based on the character of the Redeemer, even when you have extremely limited understanding of how the situation will resolve.
That's a great point. And this severe rebuke of their hard-heartedness, it sets the stage for one of the most intensely debated aspects of early church history.
The miracles.
Yes. Once the disciples repent, Jesus issues the Great Commission, commanding them to preach the gospel to all creation. But in Mark 16:17 and 18, he adds that miraculous signs will accompany those who believe. casting out demons, speaking in new tongues, and healing the sick.
And this is where theology really hits the pavement, right? The sources in Frank Leo's study present very diverse views on how early leadership viewed this miraculous confirmation.
It's a huge debate.
I tend to look at this through the lens of business, right? So are these miraculous signs essentially the aggressive founder mode of a startup company?
That's an interesting way to phrase it.
Right. Like you use massive disruptive tactics early on to break into the market and establish authority, but those tactics are meant to taper off once the corporate structure, the established church, is functioning. Or is the capital still sitting in the bank and the modern church just stopped tapping into it?
That tension defines the debate perfectly. So on one side, you have the cessationist view, championed by theologians like Justin Peters and John MacArthur. They argue for the founder mode interpretation. In their view, these signs were strictly apostolic credentials.
Meaning they were just for the original guys.
Exactly. In the first century, the New Testament canon did not exist. Early believers needed undeniable, supernatural proof that the apostles spoke with divine authority. Once the biblical canon was closed and the foundation of the church was laid, the scaffolding of miraculous signs was removed because the written word was sufficient.
So the miracles were a temporary mechanism to shatter the exact kind of hard-heartedness, the sclerocardia that Jesus had just rebuked in the disciples.
Yes, exactly. But if you contract that with the continuationist view held by scholars like Derek Prince,
What's his take?
he argues that Christ's promise in Mark 16 explicitly states, "These signs will accompany those who believe." It does not say those who believe in the first century.
I see the distinction.
Right. From this perspective, the theological purpose of the signs was never given an expiration date. The modern church's lack of miracles isn't a result of God changing his operational policy. It's a result of the church's faith expiring.
Man, that's heavy. And Frank Leo doesn't try to solve that debate for us, right? But he does highlight another massive theological fault line in the exact same passage regarding baptism.
Yes, Mark 16.16.
Right, which states, "Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned."
The syntax of that single sentence has fueled centuries of division.
But
Dr. Leighton Flowers provides a crucial linguistic analysis here. He observes that while belief and baptism are paired together as the normative process for salvation, the second half of the verse lists only unbelief as the cause for condemnation.
okay, let me make sure I track that.
It deliberately avoids saying whoever is not baptized will be condemned.
Which is a direct challenge to the traditional Catholic view, right? Because in that view, baptism is considered the indispensable sacrament of faith, the literal mechanism through which a person experiences the new birth.
Exactly. Flowers is arguing that while baptism is the expected expression of faith, the absence of it, like think of the thief on the cross who was never baptized, does not result in condemnation.
Oh, wow, right.
Only the moral failure of a hard heart unbelief condemns a person.
That's fascinating. But regardless of where a reader lands on the cessation of miracles or the sacramental nature of baptism, Frank Leo's study pulls these diverse views together to reveal a shared underlying reality about how God exercises authority.
The synergy.
Right. The final verses of both Mark 16 and Ruth 3 converge on the idea of an unresting synergistic partnership.
Yeah, because Mark 16.20 describes the disciples going out to preach everywhere, and it notes that the Lord worked with them.
There's that word again.
Yes, the Peshitta translation uses the Syriac word madar, meaning helper. It paints a picture of divine human synergy. God doesn't demand we sit on the sidelines while he does all the work, but he also doesn't hand us the assignment and abandon us.
And we see that identical synergy on the threshing floor. After Ruth returns to Naomi in the morning, Naomi tells her to wait because Boaz will not rest until the matter is settled today.
Such a powerful line.
It is. The classic commentator Matthew Henry draws a direct line here, noting that Christ, our ultimate Redeemer, is exactly like Boaz. He's an unresting Redeemer who will not cease his labor until his redemptive work in us is completely finished.
And Boaz ensures Ruth doesn't wait empty-handed either.
Right, the barley.
Before she leaves the threshing floor, he pours 6 measures of barley into her shawl. Naomi had previously lamented that she returned to Bethlehem empty, but Boaz fundamentally reverses that.
And there is a deep theological concept here called kenosis, right? Referring to Christ voluntarily emptying himself of divine privilege so that humanity could be filled.
Exactly. Charles Spurgeon notes that the barley proves God provides daily grace for the journey, sustaining us while we wait for the final legal redemption to be finalized.
I love that.
And that provision perfectly sets up the climax of Mark 16, the ascension.
Which changes everything.
It does. Jesus doesn't simply resurrect and disappear. He ascends to sit at the right hand of God. Bishop Robert Barron points out that for a first-century audience, declaring that Jesus was seated at the right hand of power was a highly subversive, dangerous political claim.
Because Caesar claimed to be the ultimate lord of the world.
Exactly. The ascension was not the early church lamenting the departure of their leader. It was their bold declaration that Jesus was actively inaugurating his cosmic rule.
Oh, wow.
He wasn't leaving the world. He was taking the throne to govern it, serving as the unresting Jill for all of creation.
Stepping back and looking at the architecture of these texts is just staggering. I mean, a destitute widow on a Bethlehem threshing floor and a group of grieving women at a sealed tomb in Jerusalem. Both encounter a Redeemer who is qualified, able, and willing.
And both narratives completely dismantle fear.
Yes, moving the characters from a place of absolute lack to overflowing provision. So we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over today.
Something to challenge you.
Exactly. We spent a lot of time analyzing how Ruth didn't just passively wait for her circumstances to improve, right?
No.
She went down to the threshing floor in the dark and made a legally binding demand of her Redeemer. So if you're listening, think about this. If Ruth's bold, deeply risky nighttime request was the required blueprint for initiating her redemption, how might our modern, highly passive concept of waiting on God be a complete misunderstanding of the audacious, synergistic partnership God actually desires from you?
It's a great question to reflect on.
It really is. Thank you for pulling up a chair and joining us on this deep dive into Frank Leo's study. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll catch you on the next one.